Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by
At Villeries Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villeries provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villeries Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969.
Dave Miette Insurance Agency, 504-556-0809 or davemietteINSagency.com.
For over 48 years, Southern Tires and Auto Repair has provided services across the New Orleans metro area. Southern Tires offers a range of tires for all vehicles and ATVs. We also have a full suite of auto repair options, including brake repair, rim repair, custom exhaust, steering and suspension, tire siping, and so much more. Southern Tires and Auto Repair, 2550 Hickory Avenue in Metairie.
CNC Drugs is a family-owned pharmacy that's been serving Southeast Louisiana for over 50 years. Whether you need help taking care of an elderly family member, a growing child, or even a pet, CNC provides patient-centered care for your entire family. CNC Drugs, large enough to serve you, small enough to know you. Locations in Mandeville and Araby.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're going to cover all the home teams live from our Pontchartrain Production Studios. Saints, LSU, Tulane, Pelicans, UNO, Tulane. We'll cover them all this afternoon. And joining us on the program, award-winning journalist Les East from CrestCitySports.com and so much more. Les, welcome to the show. Always good to have you, my friend. Beautiful day here in New Orleans. I actually had the windows open in the house this morning. Okay, you know, let the nice, I'd say less humid air come through. Probably for the last time we're ever going to do that until October.
Yeah, it is very pleasant for mid-May, and after all the rain we've had over the last 6 or 7 weeks, it's any day that's not raining is a good day.
Yeah, feel a little bit like Seattle around here these parts for lately, no doubt about it. Les, before we get started, tell the folks about what you're involved in, who you're writing for, how folks can find those articles.
Thanks. I'm writing for, as you mentioned, CrescentCitySports.com, focusing primarily on the Saints and Pelicans, and of course we're also the premier prep website out there, and I'm covering LSU for SaturdayDownSouth.com, and that will be picking up here very shortly as we get into the summer months. It's not too far away.
Looking forward to it, as always, because and looking forward to full stadiums, too. LSU's already doing that with their baseball team. The box is full now. They're anticipating a full Tiger Stadium this fall. Hopefully, again, that dome will be full as well as again, Yeoman. So a little bit of sense of normalcy as we move from the spring to the summer and hopefully, again, a normal fall. Let's talk about the Saints, and let's start off with the draft. Jeff Duncan had a one-on-one with Jeff Ireland this week in The Athletic. And one of the things he talked about was that the Saints may be graded different than other teams. It's all about prototype for them, position prototype, height, weight, speed, and then, of course, character comes into that as well. If there was ever a draft where it's, again, a position prototype draft, it had to be this one because of the obstacles they had to overcome to be able to really get to the draft, not having the ability to be able to bring guys in, do the one-on-one interviews, work those guys out. Not having the combine, which was huge, not having the combine this year, which is again where a lot of teams really get to be able to get one-on-one, but also get maybe the precursor to what they're going to do in their own facilities in Indianapolis. And then, of course, you were able to get the Senior Bowl, which they lean on very, very heavily here with the Saints as well. What are your thoughts on his comments? And based on what we have seen since he's come here, I think it's a pretty accurate statement.
Yeah, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You hear the word Sean Payton uses all the time is vision.
Yes.
You want to have a clear vision for any player, veteran, free agent, or a draft choice, clear vision for how they fit into what you like to do. And that's what the prototypes are, is trying to come up with a formula that matches players with what you need and what you want in those people, depending on the position they play. And so some people like smaller, faster guys, some people like bigger, stronger guys, some people like a mixture. And so, they've been doing this long enough now, and Jeff Ireland has a pretty good track record before he even got here, and now he's been here for a while, that they know exactly what they want for people. And so it doesn't matter what other people's prototypes might be or other people's projections. That their job is to analyze what's out there that fits what they believe gives them the best chance of success. And given their rate of success, I think you have to assume they've done a pretty good job with that, and it makes sense.
Yeah. Your thoughts on the draft overall, and then I'll ask you about some individual picks.
Well, it reminds me of the Marcus Davenport draft in that primarily it will ultimately be evaluated by the success of the defensive end they took in the first round. Now, they traded up. They used 2 number ones to get Marcus Davenport. They stayed where they were this time to get Peyton Turner. So they don't have quite the same investment. But still, if you hit on the number 1 guy, and in both cases they drafted somebody who some people didn't have rated as highly as where they picked him. So there's a similarity there. If they're right, and we still don't know about Marcus Davenport, 3 years in, we're still not clear. But if they're right about Peyton Turner, and he's going to be as good a player as they think he's going to be, and they're very high on him. He was a clear-cut choice for them at 28. If they're right about him, it'll probably be a good draft. And if they missed on him, it'll probably be a bad draft, though other guys will certainly factor into that. But the number 1 pick always overshadows everyone else. And I just see a lot of similarities to when Davenport was picked.
In that article, and I've said this, I called it a fallback pick. They were looking for the corners. They tried to get up to get J.C. Horn, to get Patrick Surtain. They weren't able to do that. I'm not sure if they would have went for the other 2 corners that again were highly rated, in Newsome and Fairley. But again, they made it very clear that this was going to be their pick. And it was not a fallback pick, that this was the guy they wanted. They weren't worried about, again, who had him rated where. That was the guy they wanted.
Yeah, that's the guy they wanted at 28.
Exactly.
Now, but they did their due diligence.
They did.
They looked at what the top 10 would cost them,
Right.
and showed discipline in not just moving up and paying whatever cost they had to pay.
Yes.
Didn't like what was there. Looked at going not quite that far up to see what they might be able to get in the teens. Didn't see anything they liked there. Decided to stay where they were. Picked the guy that they thought was, again, clearly the best guy at their pick. And I thought it was interesting what Dana Holgerson, the Houston coach, said when he said Sean Payton didn't call him to talk about this guy before the draft, and afterward he asked Sean why he didn't call him to pick his brain a little bit, and he said, I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag. So they felt like they had a steal here, and they didn't want any buzz starting around this guy that might lead somebody else to take him. So they're in a minority here, clearly, but they have a very strong opinion of this guy, and I think you got to give him the benefit of the doubt until we see what he's able to do.
Right. Unlike what Peyton did at the golf tournament a couple years ago, where he let the cat out the bag to one of the golfers. Larry Holder heard it, and of course, the rest is history there. When you look at the pick, obviously it's a pick of need, especially losing Trey Hendrickson and Cam Jordan getting a little older. I think a lot of people are thinking Cam Jordan's going out the pasture a little bit too quick here. We'll see how that kind of plays out. With that said, let's go to the second pick in the draft, 60, Pete Werner, linebacker, Ohio State. Some believe that he's not athletic enough to play in the NFL, but again, you look at his production at Ohio State, again, some would disagree with that.
Yeah, well, first of all, that is the quintessential Saints pick. They traded up to get a guy from Ohio State, two of their most
Exactly.
significant trademarks. But, getting back to Peyton talking about the vision they have for a guy, the reason why I think this pick makes sense is because Saints play a lot of nickel and dime packages. They don't have three linebackers on the field a whole lot compared to some other teams. So the traditional roles aren't necessarily the same. Demario Davis is going to be on the field all the time. So what they need is two other guys, but a lot of the time they only need one other guy.
Yeah.
And they need somebody who can rush the passer, who can play in coverage, who can cover space. And this guy at Ohio State started at strong side, started at weak side, had success rushing the passer, had success in pass coverage. So I think he has the experience and the versatility that fits into what they want to do, especially when they go to those sub packages. So I think that's what Peyton talks about when he talks about the vision. I think the vision they have for him is very consistent with what they want from their linebackers.
High football IQ and a guy that diagnoses plays very, very quickly, part of the scouting report for him as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's part of the prototype. They like smart guys, and they like guys, especially if they're going to be asked to do multiple things. They have to be smart guys because they have to know a lot more stuff to handle multiple roles. So, like any other pick, how well he performs to where he was picked will ultimately determine it. But I think this guy fits the vision they have for linebackers, and linebacker was certainly one of their primary needs going into the
Absolutely.
draft.
Paulson Adebo, third-round pick, 76th overall, cornerback out of Stanford. If they don't get a veteran corner, and I think they need one desperately, he may be a guy to be forced to be plug and play. He prototype. He's got all the measurables you want. All Pac-10 his 2 years that he did play, sat out the final year again because of COVID. Your thoughts on this pick?
I think this one makes sense as well, and I think you could sense that they felt that they really needed to get a corner at that spot. They traded up to grab this guy because they had already used up 2 picks and not addressed what was probably their biggest need going into the draft. And this guy, had he come out last year, probably would have been picked higher.
Yes,
I think
I
he
agree.
was downgraded because he didn't play last year. But 2-time first team All Pac-12, the guy's got some skills.
In a passing conference, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that makes a lot of sense. That if you're trying to look at the consensus of rankings and the value of picks, he's probably the best value pick they made in this draft. And I think because they had not yet gotten a corner, they felt like they really needed to go get this guy, didn't overpay to move up. Makes a lot of sense. But you're right, I think they still need to address cornerback with a veteran. And if they're unable to do that as well as they hope, then this guy maybe can be a starter as a rookie, but I don't think that's exactly what they would prefer to do.
Interesting, again, when you look at this, first of all, the relationship between Peyton and the head coach at Stanford. Again, inside information there, and then a lot of people believe if he comes back and plays, as you mentioned this year, he is a higher pick.
Yeah.
So maybe, again, by him sitting out in a roundabout way, it helped the Saints because they're searching for a first or second round talent, and they might have gotten into the third round.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely worked to their advantage. Had he played, there's no reason to assume his stock would have dropped.
Yes.
He was the first team
Right.
All Pac-12 2 years in a row, and he didn't have an injury or anything. There's no reason to think he wouldn't continue to progress, which certainly would have made him a second-round pick at worst. So that did work to their advantage. Obviously, David Shaw thinks highly of him because of the relationship you mentioned. If David Shaw did not speak highly of him to Sean Payton, who trusts his opinion, then they wouldn't have traded up to get this guy.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, first thing I thought was Stanford, the relationship between Payton and, as you mentioned, Shaw, and that I thought that was one of the reasons why they went in that direction. Plus, again, look, the kid can play. I mean, he was a very good collegiate cornerback. There's no doubt about that. Ian Book in the 4th round. Your thoughts?
I like that pick. They needed to get a young quarterback. Okay, we don't know what's happening beyond this year. We don't know what's happening this year, as a matter of fact. You know, Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill. There's no guarantee either one of them is going to be on the roster in 2022. Okay, they have Trevor Siemian, but he's not in the future plans that they have. So they need really somebody to take that third role away from Trevor Siemian and be a guy who they can groom, because they may need a backup as soon as 2022, and they may need to groom somebody to be a starter farther down the road. Now, I'm not sure this guy is going to be able to do that, but they took care of their short-term need and brought in a guy who maybe has the potential to fill a long-term need down the road. And again, talking about Jeff Ireland's prototype, this guy has a lot of the qualities that are associated with Drew Brees. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be anything like Drew Brees, but always been sold short because he's not taller. But he wins, he's smart, he's tough, he plays his best in the biggest games. All of those are the traits that not only Drew Brees had, but the Saints want in any quarterback, and most teams would want in any quarterback. So I think it's good value at number 4. It gives them some depth at the position moving forward, and it gives them someone that they can groom to at least be a serviceable number 2 as he gets into the NFL a couple of years, and perhaps even being more than that down the road.
At Notre Dame, he plays a tough schedule for the most part. And again, something that really caught my eye, and I'm sure a lot of others, 30-5, winningest coach winningest quarterback in Notre Dame history.
Yeah.
Which, when you look at the history of quarterbacks at Notre Dame, that's saying something.
Yeah, Joe Theismann, Joe Montana. And 35, you know, sometimes these stats you hear now are skewed because they play more games now. That's 35 starts. So that's, you know, if somebody played 3 or 4 years in the past, they'd be in the same ballpark. So that stat has a lot of meaning. Now, he's had good teams around him, but no quarterback goes 30-5. They don't have good teams around him. So yeah, he's played at the highest level. He has been probably as well prepared to come into the NFL as you could hope for in a quarterback. Now, he hadn't thrown the ball 50 times a game and with 4 and 5 wideouts like some places, but that doesn't necessarily prepare you to be an NFL quarterback. That prepares you to thrive in a system and rack up a lot of yards. But I think his smarts and his toughness and the level of competition, as you mentioned, all are significant.
And I would add accuracy as well, which is, again, a prerequisite for a Saints quarterback.
Absolutely.
You've got to be accurate. And again, so we'll see how it kind of plays out. Interesting pick, Landon Young, offensive tackle, Kentucky, all SEC, 6'6", 310. I mean, to get a guy that is all SEC playing the line against NFL defensive linemen, and to get that guy in the 6th round, it's a head scratcher, but it has a tremendous upside for this team going forward.
Yeah, and also playing at Kentucky. You know, offensive linemen at Kentucky don't get noticed like they do at Alabama and some other places.
But they're still playing that tough SEC schedule.
Oh, absolutely. So the people he's going against, I mean, the thing that routinely separates the SEC from other leagues is the strength and athleticism of the defensive linemen.
No doubt about it.
More than anything else. So going against those guys is tremendous preparation for the NFL, and the fact that he got noticed the way he did for the honor that he received tells you that he performed extremely well at a mid-level program in the SEC, not one of the elite programs in the SEC. So he stood out. The size tells you that he can be an NFL tackle, and yet it looks like he could also be a guard at some point with his athleticism. So he has a lot going for him, and I don't really know why he lasted so long, why he might have been downgraded by a lot of people. But when you're picking there, most guys are going to be a long shot to make the NFL. This guy seems like less of a long shot than most people.
Yeah, and again, prototype. And the Saints, when you look at the history of linemen, especially late in the draft, They've done very, very well. I'll be interested to see again how this guy progresses. Finally, Kawan Baker, wide receiver out of South Alabama. A lot of people like this pick in the 7th round.
Well, they needed to get a wide receiver, and they didn't. Just the timing didn't work out real well. Terrace Marshall Jr. Going to Carolina right before they were going to pick, and then there was a run on him later in the draft, and so the value wasn't there. So in the 7th round, I think they were probably looking long and hard at wide receiver. This guy, I believe, played 4 years at South Alabama. So he has experience. He should be mature. Wide receiver is a difficult position to transition to.
Inside and outside he could play.
Yeah, that's significant as well. Similar to the 6th round pick, I think what they were able to get at a position of need at that spot, I think, is better value than maybe your normal 7th round pick. Now we'll see. He may be a practice squad guy. He may make the roster. He may not. I don't know. But I think, like virtually all of these picks, the number 1 pick is the one people are going to question the most. But virtually all of these picks made sense at the place where they picked them, I think.
I would agree. I'm not going to ask you about undrafted free agents, except to say that, again, the Saints have a great track record of, again, finding undrafted free agents who come in and play for them. And, again, we'll see how those guys kind of play out. I do want to ask you, draft is in the books. Saints need to manufacture some cap room here. Needs now as they approach training camp.
Well, I think probably the number 1 thing they want to do is bring in that veteran cornerback we talked about. I still think adding depth at wide receiver is something they would like to do.
Yes.
The one spot that they didn't really address in the draft, I think they would have liked to have addressed, is defensive tackle. Although Turner maybe can play inside in some sub packages, which will take some of the snaps inside. But I think they would like to get a defensive tackle. That is not something that is easily addressed this late in free agency, but I think it's something they'll be looking at, and possibly a safety if they're able to free up enough money and they see the right person there. But this is going to be kind of bargain basement, but I would think cornerback, wide receiver, and defensive tackle are the primary areas they're going to be looking at.
They did give Josiah Bronson, the defensive tackle out of Washington, guaranteed money as an undrafted free agent. So obviously they saw something there. Let's shift to the schedule. Schedule comes out yesterday, and everybody has to remember, the Saints will play a first-place schedule this year. Despite the fact that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers won the Super Bowl, that's out the window. Saints play a first-place schedule in a post-Breeze era. First thing that struck me was not the schedule, but the comments from the time the schedule came out, even to this morning from the NFL media, the talking heads out there. Not a lot of faith in this team. Not a lot of faith in Sean Payton post-Drew Brees, in this team post-Drew Brees to be a playoff team. A lot of the pundits saying they think this will be a sub-500 team this year. So again, that a little bulletin board material for this team as they go forward. But networks believe in this team, even though the NFL media doesn't. There are 5 primetime games, really 7 if you add the 2 Fox America's Game of the Week with the 3:25 kickoffs. So really 7 games on national TV for this team. Your thoughts on the schedule?
Well, that was the first thing that jumped out at me, was the 5 primetime games, and technically 7 or potentially 7 the way you framed it. So that tells me the NFL and the networks think this team is still going to be a legitimate playoff contender even without Drew Brees. I think something else that factors into that is that Saints fans tune in when the Saints are in prime time.
Yes.
So they're expecting good ratings even if the Saints aren't quite as good. They know that they have an audience built in there. But nonetheless, I think that the expectation is that the Saints will continue to compete at a pretty high level. Another thing that struck me about those primetime games is they are generally backloaded in the schedule, which means they don't think there's much chance of this team fading and being out of it. And Sean Payton's been here since 2006. Their worst record is 7-9. So that's a pretty high floor for that duration of time. And a couple of other things. Sure, they're losing the most prolific passer in NFL history. and that's significant. But they're not losing the 2011 or the 2014 or the 2009 Drew Brees. They're losing the 2020 Drew Brees. Okay, he missed 9 games the last 2 years with injury. They lost one of them. They were not as dependent on him over the last 2 or 3 years as they have been, because they built up the defense and they drafted Alvin Kamara, and the offensive line's been good. So it's not easy to replace Drew Brees, and they may well have a drop-off at the quarterback position, but it's not like the season is hopeless because 41-year-old Drew Brees finally retired. So I think all these thoughts of the Saints collapsing doesn't make any sense to me, because no team has ever collapsed on Peyton if you don't consider 7-9 a collapse. This team is far more talented than any of those 7 and 9 teams they've had in the past, and so I don't see any reason why the Saints shouldn't be considered a contender for the division title, a contender for a playoff spot. Now, there are more question marks going into this season than they've had for the last few seasons, because they not only lost Brees, but they lost so many contributors in free agency. But they still have a very talented roster. So there is uncertainty there, but I don't think this is a team that's going to fall far, if it falls at all.
I think the schedule sets up really nice for them. I mean, when I look at it, I look at a few things. I look at, again, the cold weather games. Where are you playing the teams that are in cold weather? And look, they're not playing Green Bay in December. Okay, I mean, a lot of these teams, maybe you got a shot at the Jets in December the 12th. Maybe you'll get some bad weather in New York. You look at Tennessee and Philadelphia back-to-back on the road in late November. Maybe that's a possibility. But this team also has been pretty much battle-tested, where the elements really don't really affect them. But they're a dome team and an warm-weather team, so we'll look at that. There's no real situation on this schedule where I say, man, it was unfair the way the schedule maker put this together. I think there's one game where there's a quick turnaround, where I think you're on Monday night, and then you have to come back on a Sunday. It's the Seattle game on Monday, and you have to come back and play Tampa Bay on Halloween on a 3:25 game on Fox. So maybe that hurts you, because you're going from Seattle to New Orleans. Well, and you have to play Tampa Bay, but it's a division opponent, and you're normally ready for a division opponent. I like the way the schedule sets up. Normally, maybe you could, be a little bit upset with the schedule maker, but I think it was pretty fair this year for the Saints.
Yeah, I think so. Nothing jumps out at me as being negative. If you're going to have to play in the Northeast in December, wouldn't you want to play the New York Jets? Yeah, right. So, I mean, the one potential for serious weather, it's not a good team.
Right. You're playing at New England in September, right? So
yeah, and I don't think Tennessee or Philadelphia is going to be significantly bad in mid-November. The other thing, remember last year they had 3 straight road games late in the season. The third game of that was in Philadelphia, and that's where they lost, and their 9-game winning streak ended. So that was challenging. You look at the schedule and say, wait, late in the year, you got to go on the road 3 straight times. Well, they don't have to do that. So there's nothing there that jumps out at me as being negative. I think it lays out fine. One other thing that jumped out at me is it seems like since they've gone to this schedule where everybody plays a divisional opponent on the last weekend, it's usually Carolina. Occasionally it's Tampa Bay. I can't remember the last time they closed with the Falcons. So that kind of jumps out at you. We don't really know how good the Falcons are going to be with a new coach, but any Saints-Falcons game gets your attention, and this year it has the added attraction of being the finale.
I mentioned this on the radio show this week before the schedule came out. I am surprised the Saints are not in London this year. Atlanta is in London, and that is a marquee matchup. That is a rivalry. That again, I was surprised they didn't send the Saints to London. Happy they didn't, but I'm surprised it did not. As far as that goes, as an international game, because the Falcons are there, because that is such a Southern rivalry.
Yeah, that would have made sense. They chose not to do that, and that's good for the Saints. But the Saints have played since Peyton's been here. They have played abroad a couple of times. They have played on every day of the week that you can imagine. Every time they've had short weeks, they've had long weeks. So you know, they are, I think, built to handle that as well as anybody. So I don't think that would have been an issue for them had it happened.
Big elephant in the room for this team as we close on the Saints is Jameis Winston versus Taysom Hill. Talk about that quarterback battle that we'll see coming up in camp. Your thoughts?
Well, it's going to be fun to watch because it's an interesting battle. Because you have Jameis Winston, who people forget the touchdown passes and the yards he threw 2 years ago, which were phenomenal. Now, he threw way too many interceptions, and he got released to make room for perhaps the best quarterback who ever played. You know, it's not like he couldn't play anymore. It was like, oh, we can get Tom Brady. We'll take Tom Brady. So I think Jameis Winston maybe gets undersold somewhat. And if Jameis Winston is not the starting quarterback, he's going to be on a headset on the sideline. If he is the starting quarterback, Taysom Hill's going to be running all over the field doing all the stuff he does.
Right.
So, you know, that's something that sort of works against Taysom in an odd way in this competition. You know, my guess would be that Winston would probably win this job. I think Taysom Hill is going to be given every chance to win it. I think he's developed remarkably well since he's been here. I think he did better in his starting role for 4 games last year than I expected him to do. So I don't dismiss his chances. But if I were handicapping it, I would say Jameis Winston would probably be the favorite. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch because I think that there's a chance that the Saints' passing game is still going to be very good, even without Drew Brees.
It'll be a different passing game, though.
It'll
be a
be
more
different.
vertical passing game
And
with either guy.
with either guy, especially with Jameis Winston, they're going to be able to extend the field more. And, you know, something that I don't want to put too much stock in, but I do believe the LASIK surgery he had last offseason improved his eyesight.
Right.
And when you're talking about NFL quarterbacks, if you miss by just the slightest amount, it can turn into an interception. So I think that's something, until we see him play a lot, we don't know what that matters. But I think that could definitely help him in cutting down on those turnovers.
Right, and of course, look. The only thing that has been the biggest knock against him is decision making, and the hope is that through osmosis, understanding what's going on in that locker room, understanding that again, this is maybe his last chance to be a true starter in the NFL, that he realizes that he can't be a gunslinger, and he's even said it. You know, he's going to be a game manager. It used to be a dirty word to him. It's no longer a dirty word. He understands now as he's grown. Also, again, one thing that I'm enthusiastic about is the fact that he's working out with all these receivers right now. And I was kind of head scratching, well, where's Taysom? Is he not working out with to me, they should both be there working out with the receivers. But again, he's working out with the receivers right now. So again, that tells you something that, again, he is preparing to be the starter. Also, with Taysom Hill, it takes away a weapon if he's playing quarterback for you. And I don't, again, to me, when you're losing a guy like Drew Brees, you want every weapon you can have on the field. And by not having him in that jack of all trade role, again, I think it hurts the Saints offense.
Yeah, it does. And you know, he's valuable in so many ways. He can run the ball, he can block, he can catch the ball, he can play special teams on virtually every unit. So, yeah, if they lose that, in other words, Taysom Hill has to beat out Jameis Winston by a margin that exceeds his value in these other roles. And I think that's an extremely difficult thing for him to do. And getting back quickly to what you talked about, Jameis, you know, he was here for a year, and he had Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael and Joe Lombardi, and most importantly, Drew Brees in his ear, looking at film, breaking down film, saying, no, you don't throw the ball here. No, you go to a check down here. This is why this would be a bad decision. This is a good decision. And I think it probably clarified decision-making for him more so than in Tampa, where he was the #1 overall pick, and he was expected to throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns every game. Of course he's going to try and force plays because of the expectations on him, and I think that year, especially with Drew in his ear, is going to be very helpful in him understanding how to be a quarterback and not a stat machine.
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guest tonight is Les East, award-winning journalist with CrescentCitySports.com and so much more. I'm your host, Eric Asher. When we come back, we'll talk Pelicans, we'll talk LSU, Tulane, UNO. We'll get into all that coming up here on Inside New Orleans Sports. Stick around.
Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family owned and operated since 1989. Burkhart has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhart's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhart's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhart's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Experiencing rough weather with a bad roof can be a nightmare. It doesn't have to be.
Suburban Roofing, because when it comes to roofing, there is a difference.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Les East from CrestCitySports.com is our guest. We shifted the Pelicans. They've been eliminated from the playoffs now. Couldn't even make the 10-team tournament, which again is very, very disappointing. They have the 9th highest payroll in the NBA this year. I mean that's a top 10 payroll. You expect more out of a team that has a top 10 payroll. Now again, very top heavy on that payroll when you look at what the veterans are making on this team. And in my opinion, the veterans let this team down this year. I am encouraged by, again, the young players on this team. I think that David Griffin's done an excellent job in drafting. I think that when it comes to free agency and it comes to the trades that he's made, they've been bust. And again, this is a off season where I believe, again, he has to make great strides when it comes to just the draft where he's going to have a lottery pick and multiple picks, but more importantly, in trades and free agency, to be able to surround Zion Williamson with players that again, can make this team a perennial playoff team and eventually a championship team. Your thoughts on the season?
Disappointing, but not terribly so. I think going into the season, my expectations anyway, were that they would contend for a playoff spot or play in under the new format. Maybe would sneak in, but should certainly be in the thick of it. They got eliminated in the third to last game. But I think if you look at their record, it's disappointing. And they have been in the bottom third of the Western Conference the entire season.
Yes.
You know, 10 out of 15 teams get into the play-in or the playoffs. And they couldn't do that. And so that's disappointing, though I don't think it's significantly below what expectations were. Nonetheless, I think it is disappointing. I think the fact that they had such a condensed season with a first-year coach whose strengths are teaching defense and developing young players.
Yes.
I think the absence of normal practice time prohibited him from playing to his strengths as well as he could have under normal circumstances. That doesn't excuse the disappointment, but I think it is a factor in this team not developing faster than it did. To me, the biggest unknown is whether Williamson, Ingram, and Ball, if they bring Ball back, if those three blend together the way they need to blend together. Sometimes it just doesn't seem like the sum is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think part of that is youth. I think part of it is trying to figure out how to use a unique talent like Zion Williamson, where he's now the primary facilitator when he's in there. But I think they need to figure out do these three pieces work together the way they need to? And I think that will lead them to making their decision on Lonzo Ball, which is going to be the catalyst, I think, for everything that happens in the offseason.
I think you make a very valid point, and I've used this comparison on the radio show and here on this show. Tom Thibodeau goes to the New York Knicks, and he has a veteran roster. He turns it around in one season. Stan Van Gundy comes to New Orleans with a youthful roster, and of course they don't make the top 10 in the Western Conference. What is that about? Well, Tom Thibodeau got players that were veterans that knew how to play defense, didn't need the practice time that ultimately, again, they needed here in New Orleans. And you look at the difference between a veteran roster and a young roster, and you see the difference in again, postseason.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison to bring up because Thibodeau's a similar type of
Very
coach
similar.
and has been far more successful in his first year than Van Gundy has been. And I think that should be attributed in large part to the difference in experience on the two rosters. And I think the last time I was here, we talked about Lonzo Ball.
Yeah, we did.
And I said I've seen enough from him in his development this year to think that he is worth a long-term commitment, assuming it doesn't push you into the luxury tax.
Right.
So this is going to be economically driven to a large degree, I think. But from a basketball standpoint, I think you want to keep him. Now you have to figure out how to make it work, and I think they're in a good shape with him being a restricted free agent in that they can match any offer if it fits their budget.
Yes.
But also the sign and trade, I think, is a big possibility there because you had New York, you had Chicago, you had the Clippers, I believe, are all interested at the trade deadline. So if you decide you're not going to keep him, you should be able to maneuver those people against each other to the point where you can do a sign and trade and get pretty good compensation.
And it's necessary because sign and trades, for the most part, for the team that is losing the player, a lot of time they're taking back bad contracts and just trying to make, again, the money work, etc. So, again, from that standpoint, it is on Griffin to be able to get value for Lonzo Ball. Look, I've said it since again, the Anthony Davis trade. Every player on this roster is considered an asset with the exception of Zion Williamson.
Right.
And that includes Brandon Ingram, who had to adjust this year to taking a more of a Robin role than the Batman role that he had last year. Yeah. And again, look, he kind of grew into the role a bit, but it's still, they still need to do more with that going forward. They have a nice young complementary core here, and I'm just going to go through it. The draftees, they've done very, very well. We've seen the growth in Jackson Hayes. We've seen the growth in T. Alexander Walker. They didn't play Lewis early in the year, but we've seen his growth being on the floor. I can criticize both Van Gundy and David Griffin for not getting these young players on the floor earlier. Okay, considering again the team that you had and the way these guys have played down the stretch. Didi Louzada comes in last night, and that was the best defensive player on the floor. And again, you're saying to yourself, well, he's been in Australia for 2 years. Well, look, I understand that. Again, he didn't understand understand the English language. He had to learn that first, and he needed to get better as a player. But defensively, he showed last night he could play an NBA defense, and they can work around the other stuff. You talk about the former Lakers, Ball, Hart, and of course Ingram is a keeper. And then the off-the-bench additions that they've had, the young players, Herman Gomez, Marshall, Gabriel, Wundu, who came over in the J.J. Redick trade. When you look at that young core, whether it's going to be guys that are going to ascend to a starting role eventually or a situation where they're going to be quality backups, they look like they have that right now. Now it looks like they've got to bring in those complementary pieces that are starters, veteran starters, around Zion Williamson. This year, Bledsoe, Adams, to me have been bust. And I like Steven Adams a lot. But again, when you make it $29 million, I want more from you than what they got this past season.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about how this team is going to be built now with, again, the pieces they have from draftees to, again, some of the undrafted guys that they brought in to, again, that Laker core that may be split up this year because, remember, Lonzo Ball and Josh Hart, both restricted free agents this year.
Yeah, and Josh Hart would be a really good guy to keep.
I think you've got to keep him.
Yeah, he's
even
with
with Najee Marshall playing as well as he has, you could use two of those guys.
Absolutely. He's a glue guy, as coaches like to say. a leader, does everything the right way. I mean, you need people like that. I thought Bledsoe was a good acquisition, but I was wrong.
So did I.
He has not been a good acquisition.
He didn't want to play here.
No, that relationship.
It's
needs
Eric
to
Gordon
end.
all over again.
Yeah, good comparison. I love Steven Adams as a player. I love him as a person. I think he's just a good asset for this team.
Especially in the locker room, right, for the young players.
Yeah, absolutely.
They called him a culture-driving veteran is what Griffin was looking for. He's a guy like that.
He is, and I think it was good that they got him, and I understand why they extended him. But when you look at this team now, the second half of the season, Billy Hernan Gomez does a lot of the things that Steven Adams does in terms of taking up space, playing defense, rebounding. He's a better offensive player.
More athletic,
much cheaper. And you have to give Jackson Hayes more minutes, maybe even start him next year. So you're not going to be playing 3 centers next year. So if you look at Adams's contract and Hernan Gomez's contract and the closeness in the productivity, I think you got to shop Steven Adams as much as I would hate to see him go.
Yes.
So if you move Bledsoe and Adams, then you need to pick up some sort of veteran leadership somewhere along the way, though I think you want these young guys to grow together and mature into a group that's going to be together for a long time. There still has to be more of a veteran presence than you would have without Bledsoe.
I would agree.
And Adams, and I think Josh Hart's getting to the point where you can consider him a veteran leader.
Yes.
But so, yeah, something has to be done in free agency or in a trade. Now, maybe Lonzo Ball sign and trade brings some veteran leadership. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I think it needs to happen. Maybe they can't move Steven Adams for what they think is an acceptable price. I don't know, but I think those are all things they need to look at. But I think it all starts with what happens with Lonzo Ball. And I think Kyra Lewis Jr. could be their point guard, but I don't know that he's going to be your starting point guard next year. So if Ball goes, then you have to take a close look at who's going to be your point guard.
$17.2 million next year for Steven Adams, $17.8 million in the final year of his deal. It's a little bit more palatable than $29 million that he's making now. When you look at Bledsoe's contract, I believe it's around $13 million next year, and then it drops down to $3.4 million guaranteed the following year. No matter what, look, it's pretty obvious he wants out of here. They've got to move off of him. James Johnson comes in and plays very, very well for this team, making $16 million. He'll be an unrestricted free agent next year. There's no way he comes back for that kind of money. No. But he's a nice complementary piece and a veteran leader.
Yeah, he is. He was a good pickup at the trade deadline. The defense got better when he joined the team. Oldest player on the team, I believe. So he's a veteran presence. He will not come back at that price, you're right. But if you can get him at an affordable cost, I think he would be a good guy to keep around. Najee Marshall, of course, was a guy he was rewarded with a multi-year contract.
3 years, $5.3 million. Next year's guaranteed for him. And, of course, a possible backstop in case there's a situation where Josh Hart ends up on another team. You have another energy guy. Stan Van Gundy, I thought he was dealt a tough deck of cards this year with not having you mentioned, not having practice time, etc. There was some comments that maybe he wasn't getting through to the young players. Look, who knows? We're not in the locker room. Nobody's in the locker room this year. All that's conjecture.
Yeah.
To me, he deserves another season.
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any doubt he deserves a second season because he took over such a young team under challenging circumstances and didn't do a great job. Did, as I said before, disappointing performance by the team, and he bears a lot of the responsibility for that. But I don't think it's enough to make a long-term evaluation. Next year, I think the expectations will be much higher, and I think there'll be a lot more scrutiny then. But, he sounded so frustrated so much of the season, just talking about, the lack of effort at times, especially on the defensive end. And he almost sounded like a guy who wouldn't mind moving on after this year. I don't think that's the case now. He has been much more positive down the stretch, even as their playoff hopes have faded.
Well, look at the effort and energy they've been getting out of these players, these backup players, these young players that they finally got a chance to play.
Right.
Where they weren't getting the effort and energy out of guys like J.J. Redick, Bledsoe et al., especially the veteran players. And in some cases, that maybe permeated to some of the younger players as well, who maybe don't know how to play defense on the NBA level.
Right. And I think the way they have fought down the stretch and with their best players out. Last night they were missing 4 starters. Right. They've been missing 3 starters for this whole road trip. Every game prior to last night, the first 3 games, they were down double digits at halftime in every game, and they fought back, won 1 game, and very narrowly lost the other 2, and that was strictly because of effort and defense and not giving up. And so I think he's been encouraged by the way the young players have responded down the stretch. And so I sense in him a little more optimism going forward. And to get back to the original question, yes, I think he deserves another season.
Yeah. Final comment question on the Pelicans. A little war chest of picks and pick swaps that David Griffin has acquired for this team. This is the year you've got to start utilizing some of those assets. I mean, whether, again, you're using it to, and I hate to say tagging a first-round pick to get rid of a player because I think you've wasted that pick. If you have to use that to get rid of Bledsoe or to move on from Steven Adams, I wouldn't be happy about that. But, again, utilizing those picks to bring in a veteran player that can help you, I'm all for that, especially because of the youth that you have here. You're in the lottery. And so, again, you have your own pick in the lottery. You got a chance to be able to swap that pick with the Lakers this year because one of their picks are coming due. So, again, there are a lot of moving parts for this team in the offseason in terms of draft pick selections and the ability to utilize those as assets to be able to bring in a veteran presence for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all started with the Anthony Davis trade, and when they got Williamson and Hayes and Alexander Walker, and there was sort of a long-term view at that point about, oh, look at all these young guys and all the number 1 picks they're going to be able to use later on to add to that. Well, that's one way of approaching it, but I think you touched on something that needs to be in the conversation more this offseason, and that is using some of those assets to make a trade, to bring in a veteran presence. If the right deal is there, you can still play the long game and hang on to those picks if you don't get the right moves. But I think they need to explore all those options, and utilizing those picks for a veteran is a viable alternative. And I have no doubt that David Griffin's going to explore every possibility.
I want to run this quickly for just the audience, and I want to get back to football with us. Baseball right now, Tulane 25 and they are 27 and 25 over. 27 and 25 overall, 14 and 5 in their conference. They lost a crucial series to ECU. They take on UCF and at Cincinnati, the last 2 series in AAC. They look like they're a shoe-in for the regional. There are reports that they'll be in the Ruston regional with Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech is 14th ranked, 33 and 13, projected to host a regional. But they got a tough tournament ahead of them. USM, Charlotte, Old Dominion, all playing good baseball. UNO and Southeastern neck and neck right now for the Southland. UNO is 27 and 21 overall, 22 and 14 within the conference. Southeastern 28 and 17, 20 and 12 within the conference. LSU right now 38 and 19, 9 and 15 in the ACC and in the SEC. Pardon me. Alabama A&M left on their schedule, and then the SEC tournament. They probably have to win both of those series to be able to get into a regional, unless again they do very well in the tournament. So again, that's your update on baseball. I want to get back to football though.
Okay.
TJ Finley in the transfer portal, and then Tulane finds out last night Jeffrey Johnson, their star defensive tackle, is into the transfer portal. Talk a little about both of those losses for those teams.
Yeah, I'll start with Jeffrey Johnson and then get to TJ Finley. Jeffrey Johnson, huge blow for Tulane, obviously. Big part of that defensive line, and that defensive line and the defense as a whole has been a big part of their success in these recent years. And they sent a couple of guys into the with Patrick Johnson and Sample.
Cam Sample, right.
Sent them both into the NFL. So there's going to be some big holes to fill on defense, especially up front. So that was not a departure they were anticipating.
Not at all.
So that's a big blow to have that happen in May. But the transfer portal is there to help players. Help players and programs find a match.
Yes.
And maybe Tulane can find a match somewhere else that mitigates that loss. I don't think they're going to find somebody as good as him. But maybe they can mitigate the loss to some degree. Now, the transfer portal was designed for somebody like TJ Finley.
Yes.
Good prospect coming out of Ponchatoula High School, chose his home state university, thought he would compete for a chance to start at some point, got that opportunity unexpectedly last year with Miles Brennan's injury, and turned the ball over too much, and all of a sudden he's in a four-way battle, really a three-way battle. I don't think Garrett Nussmeier's quite there yet, but he's going to be shadowing him for a while. So coming out of spring, I think we all sensed that the quarterback competition had divided into two tiers. Miles Brennan and Max Johnson that can compete for the starting job. Finley and Nussmeier were in the second tier, and their reps were going to shrink a lot in preseason camp because they need to decide who the starter is. So it was a smart move by TJ Finley to say, let me make this decision now. There's no point in me going to preseason camp. I'm not going to win this job. I can start over somewhere else and still have a good career, probably at a Power 5 program.
I agree.
Maybe even in the SEC.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
So there are going to be a lot of opportunities for him.
Right.
I think it was a smart move on his part. He saw the handwriting on the wall. LSU still is in good shape at the quarterback position, so they can withstand that departure. So I think that's exactly why the transfer portal exists, to help a player who suddenly finds himself in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Les, always a pleasure having you on the program. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Award-winning journalist Les East of CrestCitySports.com and Saturday Down South. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there are plenty of ways to be able to catch this program now. Of course, we're live streaming on YouTube each and every Thursday at 1 p.m. as we go live here on WLAE-TV. Our first rebroadcast tonight, 6 p.m. on WLAE-TV. There's a rebroadcast at 10 p.m. on The Deuce, WLAE-TV 2 every Thursday night. Friday night, 9 o'clock Pelican Sports Television, 10 o'clock on WLAE. Saturday at 2 a.m. on The Deuce if you're up at that time. And then we finish off 5 o'clock on Pelican Sports Television every Saturday afternoon. Always at ericasher.com, always on our social media platforms, and always on the WLAE-TV YouTube page. So a lot of ways to catch the program, and please spread the word for us as well. You catch me on the radio on 106.1 FM. That is 4 to 6 weekdays. Again, you can listen live at ericasher.com. Our podcasts available on Anchor and all the major podcasting platforms, so you can listen at your leisure there. And of course, as always, I want to thank our guests, Les East, but also the great underwriters that support this program. We appreciate those underwriters. Please support those underwriters. And of course, the production staff here at WLAE-TV, which includes, again, Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, also Will Ingram. Alex Chacon is back with us, which is good to have Alex back. And of course, Tommy Faley, Tommy O'Connor, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. For Les East, I'm Eric Asher. We'll see you next week. Jeff Duncan will be our guest from The Athletic. Have a good week. See you then.